Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. Today I'm in studio with Pastor Rich Jones, the founder and chairman of Blessors of Israel. Great to be with you today, Pastor Rich.
Thank you, and we have a lot to discuss. This last weekend, the news coming out of Russia, of course, caught, I think, everybody by surprise.
Much so.
And the things that were happening this weekend just are difficult to understand what is really happening. Now, it started, I think, the build-up to this has been going on for quite some time. We're talking specifically here about Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner forces or Wagner mercenary forces. And he has been complaining more and more. We've seen the build-up to this, not enough ammunition. But we're talking about particularly in their assault of Bakhmut. But now he is stated when he started this whole thing
On Friday,
that his troops were attacked.
Yes.
By the Russian military.
So he was going to send a message by bringing 25,000 troops up to Moscow.
Right. Now, he was very careful to say this is not a coup, right? This is a protest. Well, that's a big army to be marching onto Moscow. Now, by all looks, it appeared that he meant to go to Moscow. In fact, he stopped at Rostov-on-Don, and which is the key military center, took over the military operation there in Rostov-on-Don with, I would say, little, if any, resistance.
Shaking hands, greeting people.
And interestingly, there were so many of the Russian population and Russian forces that seemed to be welcoming him. And I submit that the Russian people are looking for some type of leadership.
There's concern about how the war in Ukraine is going, and so they're looking for some type of resolution to the whole matter.
Exactly. And resolution meaning, is anybody going to stand up to Putin? Right. I think that there's a tremendous buildup and consensus in the Russian population and in the Russian forces, military. Is anybody going to stand up to Putin? Now, so far, of course, in 24 years of leadership in Russia, he has been untouchable. No one dared to do. This was a shock to the world.
The fact that he's still alive is a shock to the world.
Although we question how long.
But there's questions for how long he's going to be. He has assurances from Putin himself that his life will be spared.
And we all know that those assurances from Putin are worth tremendous amounts. No, the question is how long will he last? But meanwhile, he's still being vocal about his complaints. But
exactly.
what his complaints did was to expose what he says, to expose the lies. The lies of which these generals, these Russian military generals, perpetuated on Putin, that he's in a bubble, that he's, an information bubble, that he's only given whatever the generals feed him, and that they're feeding him lies for their own agenda, for their own self-promotion and their own self-control and power base and all that. And so this was what he was exposing. Interestingly, he was saying what the West believed ought to be said. Mm-hmm. He's exposing the weakness because he's saying there is no real valuable reason to attack Ukraine. There is no threat from NATO. This is not a Nazi-filled country. And so the exposing of those lies was certainly the point. But really the main thrust of it all was he felt betrayed by these Russian generals, and his marching on to Moscow was to overthrow them, not Putin.
So let's talk about how this is going to impact Russia in regards to how it is viewed on the world stage, beginning with the East, and then for our viewers, specifically Israel.
Well, let's start with Russia itself, because I think what it exposed was Putin's weakness. We've already been seeing the weakness of the military. This strong, touted, one of the great forces of the world has been quite embarrassed, actually, I think, at their performance on the battlefield.
Agreed.
And so the general population of Russia. Of course, they get a narrative that makes it look like all kinds of successes are happening.
Yet their sons and daughters are dying on the battlefield, so there's concern.
By the tens of thousands, if not
Exactly.
hundreds of thousands. But this is also one of the things that Prigozhin brought out, is like they're feeding him lies. They're feeding him lies like, there are all these successes on the battlefield, when in fact there is not. That's part of the issue. But back to my point, which is the Russian population itself, I think, are seeing Putin now exposed as not the all-powerful, all-knowing leader. Now it is showing his weakness militarily, but also in his strategies. I mean, he was on, Saturday, coming out and making all kinds of bluster, what he was going to do. And
The fact that he had to come out and say something at all was a sign of his weakness.
But then, I mean, he was blustering of like, this is mutiny. This is, going to be met with full force, and he was just really being quite threatening. Meanwhile, nothing was stopping those Wagner forces from advancing. They sent some air power, but they were immediately shot down.
They were.
Immediately shot down. So therefore, again, we saw weakness. Nothing was stopping this rush towards Moscow. And then all of a sudden, we wake up, Sunday morning, and a deal's been struck. So again, and then his narrative was all soft-pedaled. He made a deal. And now Prigozhin can go to Belarus. And anybody of his forces can choose. You want to go join the military? You want to go home?
Or be assimilated into the Russian military.
Whatever you want to do. It's at your call.
Exactly.
And now the tone has completely changed. I think the population in Russia itself are seeing a different side of Putin, and it exposes weakness within Russia, which is key. Again, as I said before, I think the Russian population and the military are looking for some kind of leadership, and Prigozhin, for the moment, for a day, 2 days, perhaps looked like, quote, the savior of Russia. That, of course, quickly shut down. Although in the aftermath of it, there's, a narrative, and it'll be interesting to see where this narrative goes.
You do have countries like China, Saudi Arabia today, came out and vocalized their support of Putin and Russia. And so you have that coming alongside of that strengthening of the narrative of the alliance with the East to continue to promote what has been happening.
Because I think the exposed weakness of Russia pushes them even more toward China. Now, China's leadership, of course, is a very important topic, which we definitely need to discuss. But it pushes Russia even more into that sphere. And therefore, what we see in relation to Israel is that those nations that are forming that alliance, from a biblical perspective, will gain strength and gain force, and those are the ones that will come against Israel as we move into the latter days. So should we be watching? Should we be noting what's happening right now? Absolutely.
And that's why Blessors of Israel, our newsroom, focuses on what is happening with these strategic alliances between Russia, China, Iran. Now what's happened with the rapprochement with Saudi Arabia and Iran. All of these are interesting alignments that are taking place, and as a result of what has happened with Ukraine.
Yes.
It is polarized East versus West.
Right.
And so we're literally, I believe, seeing the chessboard unfold before our very eyes.
That's
in
right.
regards to the events of the latter days, specifically Ezekiel 38 and 39.
And we are seeing, again, the realigning of nations. We're seeing a military a realignment, but also an economic. Now, that is another topic. I want to talk about BRICS and the devaluation of the dollar.
They have a big announcement coming out in August.
So we want to be watching carefully about the development of that as well.
Well, this has been a great discussion in regards to what's going on in Russia. It's been wonderful to have you join us today. Encourage you to learn more about Blessors of Israel by visiting our website. That's www.blessors.org. Encourage you also to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, and Getter. And please subscribe to our YouTube and our Rumble channels. It's been a blessing to be with you today. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.